Thank you, and welcome everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the Select Board Meeting Room in Town Hall. So just give me 1 second. Does this sound okay? Does this sound much better? Okay, thank you. Again, I want to thank everybody for attending tonight, both virtually and here in person in the Select Board Meeting Room. Tonight's meeting, or public forum, I should say, is regarding the Valentine property. It's a property that we've acquired about 4 years ago, and as we go through the slides and the presentation tonight, give you the history of what's been done since that point in time, and then I think more importantly, we want to talk about what we're going to do moving forward. First, I'd like to ask everybody who's on Zoom, and thank you for joining us remotely, if you would go ahead and mute yourselves. I do want to preface this by saying this is the first time we've tried this setup here in the Select Board Meeting Room, so I just ask for your patience as we try to work through some of our technical difficulties here. Hopefully we won't have too many, but if we do, ask for your patience. And then as we go through the presentation, it's about 20 slides. I would ask you all that you hold your questions and comments until the end, and if it's regarding a certain slide, please just make a mark of that or make a note of that, and then we can come back and return to it. When we do open it up for comments and questions, I would ask that you all come up here to the podium. We have a mic set up there. I promise we won't do a debate style format here, even though it's kind of set up for that, but those of you here in the audience can see what I'm talking about. But that being said, why don't we go ahead and get started. By the way, my name is Michael Herbert. I'm the town manager. I probably should have introduced myself first, but I think most of you know me here. So let's just get started. Let's start talking about the Valentine property and the circumstances to us acquiring it first. A little review. So this really became on the town's radar, I think, several years ago. Prior to 2018, there was some interest in the property, but for various reasons, the town was never able to acquire it. It was acquired eventually by a group called Capital Group Properties. And what they did is they had submitted a 40B application and proposed to develop 140 units of housing, again, under the Chapter 40B law. This is a rendering of that proposal. As everybody can see, some of you might be familiar with it. They had planned on building, again, 140 units of housing. 25% of that was to be affordable. They planned on renovating the house into a clubhouse, but they didn't plan on keeping the barn. They did receive a comprehensive permit eventually from the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is the entity that issues comprehensive permits, to construct 99 units. But the developer had the option and exercised the option to appeal that decision to what's known as the Housing Appeals Committee, or HAC, to go ahead and develop a full 140 units. And if anybody is familiar with the HAC process and appeals of comprehensive permits, you would realize that the developer's opportunity for success at that appeal was very, very good. So in order to save the property, town officials entered into negotiations with Capital Group to negotiate a purchase and sale agreement, which we eventually were successfully able to do. The property was appraised at $4 million. I know people look at the condition of the property and think, how could something like that be appraised for $4 million? I just want to say it's important to note that when you're appraising property, you're not just looking at the condition of the existing facilities or buildings on the property, but you're also looking at what can be developed potentially. And with a comprehensive permit already in hand, the value of that property increased significantly. Somebody, even without appealing to the Housing Appeals Committee, with that comprehensive permit for 99 units, a builder could seriously just walk into the building inspector's office and apply for a building permit and go ahead and construct those units. So that's why it was appraised so high, not necessarily because the buildings were in that great shape, but because of the potential of what could be built on the property. And eventually, we negotiated a purchase and sale agreement for $3.5 million. And that sale became effectuated through a number of votes, first at town meeting and then also at the ballot. We had 4 town meeting votes associated with the property at our 2018 town meeting. So Articles 10 and 12 authorized the purchase of the property for $3.5 million, and which included the use of CPA funds in addition to a debt exclusion for that. Article 11 was a restrictive covenant on the Einen Hicks property, which was an abutting property, and both Cindy and Robin are here tonight. Just to explain a little bit of what that was, there's 16 acres that abuts the Valentine property, and the Einen Hicks family had agreed to, if the town eventually purchased the property, they agreed to place a deed restriction restricting development on their property to only 8 additional single-family homes. Again, it's 16 acres. If you look at what a 40B was able, the 40B project that was going to be on 7 acres at the Valentine property, at 7 acres, you can imagine what could have been built on 16 acres. Article 13 was additional CPA funding to help secure and improve the property. And so all of those votes passed by a clear majority, actually a 2/3 majority, at town meeting. And from there, the question of whether or not to acquire the property went to the ballot in what's known as a debt exclusion, which is a property tax override specifically for certain capital projects or capital acquisitions. And so that passed overwhelmingly as well, with almost 80% of the vote. So the town did acquire it. At that point in time, we had hired a project manager specifically for this property and properties within what we call the Warren District at the corner or at the intersection of Chestnut and Elliott Street here in town. And so there were already, after that person was in place, we started making improvements to the property and to the site. If you remember, the site was pretty overgrown to the left side of the barn or to the west side of the barn. That was cleared in 2019, and that was completed by volunteers, DPW, and also professional service came in and removed a lot of that brush. We also had a cleanup on the north side of the property in 2022, which was all made up of volunteers. DPW was able to bring in some dumpsters and take those away, but a lot of that work that you've seen in the back has been done by volunteers. We did do a clean out of the house and the barn in 2019. The chimney was repaired in 2019 as well. Actually, I should say both chimneys were repaired. The sliding glass door that was on the west side, that was replaced and basically restored with the clapboard siding back in 2020. And then in 2021, we cabled the barn in order to maintain its structural integrity. I think everybody's seen the barn and seen the condition that it's in order to make sure that it still stood, especially through another winter, we went ahead and did what's known as cabling, where you're using different cables and different pulleys and different tension to structurally stabilize that property. We've also done soil testing and are currently in the process of remediation. There is a very, very small section, or a couple of very, very small sections on the property that have higher or elevated levels of arsenic above DEP standards. I don't want to scare anybody. Again, it's very small and very contained. And what we're doing now is actually in the process of cleaning that soil up. And bids are due tomorrow, I believe, for that. And throughout, since we've owned the property, we've also issued several bids for work, including stabilization of the foundation, a repair of the foundation, removal of the roof so we could have an opportunity to look at what the structure looked like from the top in, and with the idea of maybe dismantling that barn and then re-erecting it, utilizing the pieces of the structure that we could salvage. I'll go back to 2019. We've had public discussion about this property for a while. And again, the first real time we had a discussion about it was in the spring of 2019 at the Ashland Community Center. And we had a presentation at that time by our property manager, David Foster, and several uses at that time were talked about, including an entertainment venue, a function hall, a dog park was proposed, a working farm, among several other options. And what came out of that meeting was the select board decided to form a Valentine Property Committee to explore similar properties in other communities and also discuss the feasibility of certain uses of the property. And they were also charged with developing an RFP for a private partner for the project. So the Valentine Property Committee was formed in late 2019. And with that, I'm actually going to bring up a member of the Valentine Property Committee, Scott LaBelle, who is going to talk about their work and some of the information that they gathered as part of their process. So, Scott?
Thank you, Michael. So, so the Valentine Committee, what we did was first we learned about the history and the condition of the property. Property dates back to the 1700s. Those buildings weren't on it at the time. We believe that the barn was moved to that property in about the mid-1800s. There actually is a book about the Valentine family, so there's a lot more history to discover about the family and the property. We had presentations from leaders of area revitalized town-owned properties as a result, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We solicited proposals for repair work after looking at the condition of the property and seeing, for example, that there were the supports in the basement weren't actually holding up the building, which is what resulted in the later cabling. But we as a committee didn't have the authority to actually contract for those repairs, but the stabilization of the building, but it was later done. We did develop an RFP to seek partners to revitalize the property. But before we get to that, we did have, there we go. We did have presentations from 4 organizations. The first one was the Native Community Organic Farm, which actually I was a board member of that farm for 10 years. And the Native Community Organic Farm is a working organic farm that's been on that property since 1976. And there's value in terms of what we learned from them in that Natick has a public-private partnership with a 5013C that helps to fund the staffing in part and construction of buildings on the property. Tragically, it was actually March 17th, 2021, their 1814 barn burned down, and as of July 2022, the private partner, what we call the board of the farm, has raised an estimated $1.1 million to rebuild the barn. And that's because the farm is such an integral part of the town where, if you have kids who go to Natick schools, it's built into their curriculum that every child will visit the farm. It's integrated with their town recreation department and after-school events and summer teen program all around the farm. So it's a real part of that community, and I hope that whatever we do with Valentine Estate, that it also becomes a real part of the community here. It's gotten more complex to reuse buildings in town. So for example, I apologize for missing that slide. So there's a Native Community Organic Farm. That's a picture of their sugar shack, as their barn is no longer. And the Midway Thayer Homestead, as you can see, was acquired in 2006, but the farmhouse wasn't renovated until 2012, so 6 years to move from acquisition to renovation. They, however, have a successful model of having weddings in their barn and a venue for rent. in the warmer seasons, as it's not truly a heated year-round structure. They do have a caretaker apartment in the farmhouse, and it works for them where they're actually getting money back annually for rentals of that barn for weddings. I'm going to skip the expenditures and go on to Holliston. So Holliston Historical Society was very gracious to come and talk to us about what they've got, and they felt that if we were successful that we could actually be a competition to them. But again, their property was acquired in 1967, so a long time ago, and they have built a self-sustaining entity over a period of time. Josiah Smith Tavern is in Weston. We feel that Weston has a little bit more luxury of time to get things organized and get moving. It's taken them 10 years and 2 committees to start a project, and they're still under construction. So that's something that we don't feel that we really have that kind of luxury, and we do want to kind of get things moving more quickly if we can. So what they are doing is that they're putting in what they call a vanilla space to be rented, and that they're going to partner with a private entity that will be a lessee that would have to put in a commercial kitchen. So, in terms of the RFPs that we got, or responses to the RFP, we did get one proposal from a for-profit entity to turn the Valentine estate into a B&B and function hall. In, I think, the opinions of many of us on the committee, it was a whole lot better on paper than it was when they actually came and presented to us. We also received a letter of interest from a nonprofit organization. They didn't really have the wherewithal to come up with a written proposal. The RFP from the private corp company was rejected, and we later on did get interest voiced through from a member of the Valentine family. I'm not sure if that will come to anything, but that's also out there. Through the process of the committee, we discovered that the property is under Article 97 restrictions, and Brandy Kinsman's going to tell us more about that.
Put this down a little bit lower. Okay. So, as Michael mentioned, one of the warrant articles when we purchased the Valentine property authorized CPA funding to be used. And CPA funds require that both conservation and a historical deed restriction be placed on the property. In addition to the CPA restrictions, like Scott had mentioned, the property also has restrictions associated with Article 97. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So conservation restrictions permanently protect open space by limiting the future uses of the land, including the type of development that can take place. And the historical restrictions protect the historical features that make the property significant, and that is for both the barn and the house. The conservation restrictions are across the entire property. These restrictions are recorded with the property's deeds in perpetuity. They kind of run with the land, so the land would never be able to be transferred or sold or have any action taken on it without those restrictions in place. So approximately a year ago, the Select Board appointed a Valentine Restriction Subcommittee, which was myself and Steve Mitchell, and we were charged with creating draft restrictions for the property. When we put the draft restrictions together, we used a lot of the work that the Valentine Committee had done, and also the feedback from the public forums that we've had. And this was a public process. In fact, there were a lot of people that came out to our meetings and were a part of our Valentine Restriction Subcommittee. We did an initial review by Town Council, and the restrictions listed sort of the prohibited and permitted uses based on the work that the Valentine Committee had done. This will need state review. It's the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, which is involved in these restrictions. And so they will do an initial review, and then we need to work on getting a holder for both the historic and the conservation restrictions, because we wouldn't be able to finalize those restrictions until we have a holder in place for both of those. And Scott had also mentioned Article 97, which was something that we had discussed with Town Council and wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what it is and give you an overview of this. So Article 97 it became Article 97, which is part of the Massachusetts Constitution. And basically the restrictions that Article 97 provide are because of language that was put in the actual town warrant article and filed with the deed. So the purpose of Article 97 is to provide protection for conservation purposes, which is a lot of what the CPA restrictions do as well. Article 97 doesn't necessarily prohibit commercial activity as long as it is consistent with the protected purposes of the property. But the one issue that Article 97 designation, it does not allow for disposal of the property, which includes any long-term leases or selling the property. So with Article 97, it does limit the ability of the town to be able to partner with a private entity that may want to invest in the property. But we are able to potentially partner with a 501c3. Article 97, although it is possible to remove the designation, it is incredibly difficult to remove. It would take a unanimous decision of the Conservation Commission, a select board vote, a town meeting vote, a 2/3 vote of legislature, and an approval of the state agencies as well. And we would also have to do a land exchange within Ashland to designate another property as Article 97 land. So as you can imagine, it's a very heavy lift. We also think that there might be a possibility that if we were to lift the Article 97, that it may invalidate the restrictions, the covenant that's on the Hicks property that abuts the property as well. So we're not proposing the removal of Article 97. We just wanted to present information as to what Article 97 is and what that process looks like. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Michael.
Thank you both, Scott and Brandy, for reviewing those. So we've talked a lot about what's happened before and about the property itself. Now we wanted to talk a little bit more about what's next and what we can do with the property. First, I think we should start off with what we have currently in regards to resources and what some of the constraints on those resources are currently. So right now we have $750,000 in American Rescue Plan Act funds that have been allocated for the Valentine property itself. So if we are going to use those funds, it would require that the ultimate purpose of the property would be to enhance travel and tourism and to provide public access to the community. We also have $125,000 in Community Preservation Act funds that were passed at town meeting. And that is limited to being used to repair the roof, the foundation, and the removal of invasive plants around the property. If you're familiar with the property, you will know that along the eastern side of that and in towards the back, the northern side of it, It's full of invasive plants that just take over a property, including bittersweet and multiflora rose and I think some buckthorn in there as well. Very hard to eradicate, but we have funding allocated to do that. We also need to understand that we have a limited ability to maintain the property. We will more than likely need to depend on volunteers to do some of the maintenance work on this property. Just to give you an example, between the whole town, between DPW's Highway Department and Cemetery Parks and Trees, we have a total of 11 people to cover the whole town, and that's even after adding a couple of positions in the last couple of years. So, and they're supposed to maintain all the roads, all the fields, the cemetery, do the burials, etc. So one of the things that I think is very visible if you drive by, if you had to guess what would be two of the main things that would need to be repaired, people would immediately say the roof, and those with a little bit of a closer eye might say, okay, the foundation is in pretty bad shape in a couple parts as well. So we currently have a bid out there, so there's currently a bid opportunity for contractors to repair the roof and make a foundation repair. And that's due next week, Jen? Yeah, so Nick the 7th, July 7th. So we've set aside an estimate of $150,000 for those repairs. But I think a question we have to ask, I would like to ask all of you, is what if it comes in over that amount? How much are we comfortable with spending on what could potentially be temporary roof and foundation repairs? I don't know what that answer is. Again, I'd like to get some feedback on that. If it comes in at $300,000, do we go ahead and spend that money? Again, we've got $750,000 in ARPA funds that we could utilize. But how much is too much? And if it is too expensive to do those repairs, what do we do next? We're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place on this property. And the other thing we have to think about in terms of next steps is what are we going to do with the property itself? So I believe it was mentioned before, Kate Valentine, a member of the Valentine family, her family put together a conceptual plan for the property. They called it an agricultural center. And if you have an opportunity to review that, I'm not sure if it's publicly available, but you would see that it incorporates a lot of the things that we talked about in a public forum, and also what the Valentine Committee heard in terms of feedback of what the property could be used for. So that specific concept looked to turn the barn into a theater and function space. It created an outdoor amphitheater in the back. And it utilized the house for multifunctional space, so meeting space, space for offices. We could use it for municipal purposes as well. And then it also had a farm component for it as well. You can see here on the slide, it's a general overview of what that property would look like. So one of the things that I am proposing that we do tonight is that we utilize $75,000 in those ARPA funds to do a feasibility study / master plan with an estimate associated with it, so we could get a high-level estimate. This is something that's regularly done. You do a conceptual design, which would come with a conceptual design estimate. We did that with the public safety building when we were doing feasibility study for the properties and the site. And then after we get that high-level estimate, I propose that we reconvene and we talk about, okay, what are our next steps? If the property comes in, you know, if to make this a reality, what we're talking about a reality, if that costs a few $1 million, is that something that we're willing to take on? What are the ongoing maintenance costs associated with that? What are the ongoing operational costs associated with that? And I think that's a conversation that we would need to have once we have a solid figure, because right now we don't have a solid figure. I can go over some of the estimates or some of the actual costs that were associated with the properties that Scott mentioned. He skipped over a couple spreadsheets, and I'll just go back to them. bear with me. First, I'll start with the Thayer homestead. And if you see here, okay, it's showing up on the screen. These were all CPA funds used by the town of Medway for the Thayer homestead. They encompassed hiring a preservation specialist to analyze the property for potential rehab and use. They did acquire the property through eminent domain, and so they had to fund some settlement costs associated with that property, and then also construction costs as well of $2.2 million. All told, again, as Scott noted in his presentation, or his part of the presentation, the property was acquired in 2006, and they started the renovation in 2012. So all told, they spent $3,471,000 on the Thayer homestead property. And I've taken the liberty to look at what that number would be like if we adjusted it for inflation. And so that comes out a little bit shy of $5 million. I don't think that takes into account this year's inflation yet. But as Scott mentioned, it is a piece of property that is utilized quite heavily by the public and by the town. It does not require a subsidy by the town to maintain. So I think that's, they have a very successful model for them there. The other property that Scott mentioned that also heavily utilized CPA funds was the Josiah Smith Tavern. And that's been going on for a while. They had actually acquired the building, I think, back in the early 80s. And there were some there were historic preservation restrictions associated with it at that time. In 2004, they started spending CPA money on this. They wanted to do some exterior renovations. The Society for the Protection of New England Antiquities was the holder of the preservation restriction. Again, they spent some money on developing a plan for the two historic buildings, design fees and engineering fees, and then also construction funding was allocated in 2019. And so it's nearing its completion right now. And if you've ever had a chance to go through Weston Town Center, they've just redone their downtown. And if you look at that tavern and the old library, which is part of this complex, it's really a unique asset, a unique site. This one was a little bit more expensive than the Thayer homestead. I do want to point out that it's also a 15,000 square foot complex, if you will, between the library and the tavern. So it's pretty large substantially. The costs, the to-date costs were $15.5 million, and then if you look at inflation-adjusted figures, it's a little shy of $18 million. Again, I don't want to scare anybody. It's 15,000 square feet, so it's pretty large. I do think restoring this property, the Valentine property, is going to be an expensive proposition, but I don't think it's going to be at this scale. The other piece of information that we do have is regarding reconstruction of the barn. A couple of years ago, we received bids to recreate a replica of the Warren barn. And again, this is just a shell. It didn't include any kind of interior fixtures like bathrooms or even insulation or, or anything like that, any plumbing or electricity. The low bid came in at $905,000. The high end of the bid spectrum, it came in at $1.1 million. And again, just if you look at that low bid in inflation-adjusted terms, that's $965,000. So if you're familiar with what construction costs have been doing lately, it's just gone through the roof. It's pretty crazy. I don't know if it's going to go down at all. It seems like they're here to stay, but that is something that we will have to deal with. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to go through with this. I think I covered everything. With that said, if you have, thank you very much for sitting through the presentation. Took a little bit longer than I had anticipated, but I think we still have plenty of time for comments and questions if you have those. If you will, I would just ask you to stand up to the podium if you do have comments or questions, so everybody on Zoom and everybody who's watching at home can hear you as well. So thank you.
Are you going to also moderate people on Zoom to make comments and questions?
I can do that. I just need to.
Ask them to raise their hand.
Yes, if you are on Zoom and you would like to make a comment or question as well, please utilize the raise hand function that's at the bottom of your screen under the reactions button. That would greatly assist in helping moderate this. Kate's going to be our first one up here.
Yeah. break
Thanks,
days.
Kate.
Thank you for the presentation. I think people know that I am involved in things in town, and I think I've been to probably not all of Brandy and Steve meeting, but I was on several of those and pay attention. And the Valentine estate is really important to me. It's really important to me because I do value historic properties, I think, for our town. It also is really important to me because our town overwhelmingly did vote to save this property. So I have a few questions. The roof and foundation repair, are we including as part of the RFP a requirement that their historic preservation experience / expert, or are we just getting everyday roofer that may not have any experience or care about a historic property?
There is no requirement to be like a restoration or historical specialist, no.
So why would we be just letting anybody do roof and foundation repair on a historic property?
Because we need to get it repaired as soon as possible. That being said, Kate, I do think, we're not looking at changing much of what is there right now. So the roof repair would still include the use of 1x10 or 1x12 boards as opposed to plywood. So the 1x12s are currently what's in there right now. And then your standard architectural shingles. And then the repair of the foundation is to repair basically what's underneath the back end of the property. So replacing some of the sill that had been rotted, and then also maintaining the beams or replacing a current beam that's there with something that's more up to code, I should say, but still is generally the same thing as what you see.
Well, I would like to see us have historic preservation, at least review them and kind of scope the people and talk about it. I don't think that we should take lightly. I just value historic properties, and I feel like in a great responsibility as a community of doing something in the right thing. And the right thing isn't necessarily getting just exactly the low qualified bidder on a regular property. And then along with the, I still have heartburn over spending $75,000 for a study about possibilities of this property when we don't have holders for the historic and the conservation restriction. Because I feel like that's a little bit cart before the horse. I'm not opposed to paying experts for their talents about that, but I think that is way out of order. I would like to see us focus on those because they ensure the protection of the property, and they also kind of they are critical to what happens next. So we have to get those right, and I feel like we should not be spending money about that. And so I did hear, like some, we've kind of have this draft, I've seen it, but it just seems to not go forward, and I know that's critical. So kind of what your thoughts are about that.
About moving forward with the feasibility study without having the restrictions in place?
Well, both, I guess.
Well, the restrictions are important. I don't want to minimize that, but I do think if people can get behind, again, the proposal or the concept that was put forward, I think that is consistent with the restrictions, the draft restrictions that were put in place. I think finding a holder is going to be very, very, very difficult for this property, just by the nature of it. And I think actually having a feasibility study and saying, okay, this is what we would like to do with it, and also having an estimate with it, and having a town behind that estimate would actually service us better in the long run in terms of finding a holder. So I don't think it's necessarily the cart before the horse, personally.
Maybe, but I think there's enough renderings and ideas about what was proposed to still be looking for a holder based on that, if that's the direction. And I haven't personally heard that that is a direction we want as the town. So I don't know how we get to that. So spending money for a proposal that we've seen and we sort of like the idea, I don't know how we make that decision as a town. So I have concerns about spending $35,000 if it's looking at that, if it's fleshing out a design that I'm not sure the community agrees with. And I think I also worry about, along with that, it's sort of this all or nothing. And I've lived here for 20 years now, and I always often see us stumble, like we go for the big prize instead of, I do sit in the townie section of town meeting, and when there's critical things like fixing the roof on the school, we right away say, give us the money. Yep, fix that roof, please. But when it's other things that are discretionary, we ask to be more measured about that, right? And we don't need the $12 million, we all know that, right? We maybe don't need the $2 million, maybe we can do it in pieces, right? And I get frustrated when I never hear those smaller baby steps, but still going forward, making the property usable to people. So I would like to see that as well.
What if that master plan and that estimate was broken down into phases, had things broken down into phases that we as a community could take on maybe one or two at a time? Would that be more?
For me personally,
palatable?
and I don't think I'm the only one, that's acceptable. But again, you're asking for a study of what plan, right? And I believe that people that are engaged about it sort of like that, but I'm personally concerned of how that lines up with the restrictions and how we get to a community we want that, right? If it's maybe everyone you've talked to likes it, but there's 19,000 people in town. And I know but look, we got 4% of us to come out to vote, but 4% is better than the 6 people on the Valentine committee. So I think that has to be part of before we go ahead with a study.
Do you have some ideas of what you would like to see there?
All of the above. I think we should have a farm component of a farm. I would love Ashland to stand for that. I just heard a thing on NPR tonight on the way home that the groundwork in Natick, anyway, they supply food to people. It's only 3.5 acres, and over especially COVID, they've learned how to produce food 12 months a year, right? 100,000 pounds of food off of 3.5 acres. So that 2 acres can be producing food for people. And right now, if you go to the grocery store, I mean, it's just increasing food security. So I would love to see that part of it. It values the history of the property. And I think with 19,000 people in this town, we're smart enough to make that a wonderful asset for the community.
Okay. That's a good point. Cliff is coming up to the mic.
Yep. I'll try to share your screen. You don't have to, really, honest. Cliff Wilson, 378 Elliott Street. And first of all, I just want to make a clarification to something that Scott alluded to earlier when he said that in the mid-1800s the barn was moved there. That's true. However, it was moved from a different part of the property. It's not that that barn has been on that property since the 1750s, roughly, and it was moved closer to the house. So it's not that it's some foreign barn that, came from Framingham or something. It was there to begin with. It's a Valentine barn, and it's still there. I also agree with Kate about the blowing $75,000 to get somebody to come in and do pretty pictures and tell you what you want, what you tell them that you want to hear. I think that's a complete waste of time. I think we run into that time and time again in this town. We get all of these visionaries who come in and they show us beautiful plans. The reality that results from that seldom meets their needs. I would rather see the I'm gonna just do it. Look, the doggone barn has been sitting there for 4 years and the roof has been collapsing and the foundation ain't getting any better. Let's get that settled. Then at least it's more than stabilized with cabling. It's actually, you got a roof over your head, you got a foundation under you. Now we can discuss where we go from there. I also believe that we should be trying harder to get the organization, whatever organization we may be able to find, to hold the restrictions. That you've been hearing this for 4 years now. The first thing you got to do with that type of property is get people to hold the restrictions. We've had the opportunity in the past and we blew it. Let's not blow it again. Let's do that first. Let's get that underway. Let's get the roof fixed. Let's get the foundation fixed. And then we can discuss all the mighty plans and all the pretty pictures later. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Kate, can you unmute yourself? And yep, there you have. So Kate, you have the podium, if you will.
Thank you so much. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
My name is Kate Valentine, and I am a distant descendant of the family Valentine estate. My great Aunt Frances used to live on the Valentine property there, and that which extended back into what the Enion Hicks property is currently. And I appreciate you including our ideas that we had submitted. And I would love to be able to make those public somehow, Michael, if that's welcome. But I'm also curious to understand what if you're open to submitting proposals or what the protocol is moving forward in terms of submitting ideas in a more official capacity. I was told in the past that if I submitted it, that it might be make me exempt from being considered in some sort of official manner.
Yeah, so Kate, at that point in time when we were talking about it, we were still looking at the possibility of the town divesting of the property and either selling or leasing the property. And so as part of that, we would have to go through an RFP process. I think, you know, the fact is I think that we're going to need to plan on doing this ourselves as a town and as a community. And so at that point in time, we wouldn't have to go through an official RFP process for ideas, at least. We could certainly solicit those informally.
Great. Well, I know I don't know many of you, and I'm an outsider, but have a historical interest in the property, and I'm more than willing to roll up my sleeves and volunteer my services to fundraise until the time comes when the property is returned to the public use.
Thank you, Kate. Robin?
Robin Hicks, 11 Franklin Road, Ashland, Mass. Just wanted to say that I think one of the important things is to secure the roof, because if anyone knows a barn or any house, once the roof goes, everything goes. And this has been sitting here for 4 years. We haven't done a thing. We had money allocated for the roof, and it hasn't been done. So that should be the #1 priority. Secondly, we should take some of that flag waving stuff off of the roof that says, "Here I am, I'm falling down." I've been down there and mowed the left side of the field to make it look better. The right side is still trashed. So I'm going to try and sneak down there again and do the right side. I know how busy Roy is and Dougie. We had a cleanup committee. We pulled a lot of the stuff out of the woods, piled it. It's still there. We have 3 mattresses or 4 mattresses that are still there that were dumped illegally. We have to make this presentable to people when they ride by. This meeting, appreciate the forum, but there's not a lot of people that know about it. We should have a banner out front saying that the Valentine forum is tonight. Be aware. One of the select board called me and said they weren't, excuse me, aware of this meeting until today. So we have to advertise this. This has been sitting for 4 years. It's town property. We have to make it look like town property, like we're proud of it. Right now, it looks like the town dump that we capped many years ago. It's terrible. It's really a shame that we've let this go this far. Thank you.
Steve, I see you've got your hand raised if you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate, I just wanted to comment on the concept of a feasibility study or an assessment study. And I understand, the criticisms, the hesitancy to do that, but I'd like to advocate for that. I think one of the things, the reason for that is I think one of the concerns I would have is the viability of some of the activities that we may want to have on this property. And I'll just use as an example, let's say a performance venue. I personally don't know if a performance venue would be viable in our region. We're sandwiched between 3 communities that have performance venues. Plus we have the Warren Center, which is expanding their activities and programming in the area as well. So for me, I don't have that information. I think it would be valuable to have some kind of assessment as to, what is really viable and what is not. I mean, I love the idea of an agricultural center, the way Scott and Kate talked about bringing it back to that kind of concept. So again, I'm advocating for spending some money on an assessment study. Thank you.
And Robin, I didn't get a chance to ask you, are you in favor of moving forward with a master plan study? I think so. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, Rob? I'm asking. Rob, you're still muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted a couple things, but I wanted to clarify what Robin said about the select board member. That was me. I did, of course, know about the meeting because we talked about it on several occasions. But I think one thing I wasn't sure we're actually going to do it because I had trouble finding it on the town website, and that was a discussion I had with Robin. So I think we probably should take another look at how we're doing this public information, because some of the information about this meeting was not that easy to find, even though I did know about it. The other thing, couple questions. I do want to encourage people's reactions to Michael's plan, and I expect we'll have a very full discussion about it at our select board meeting. The couple things. One is we had at one time openly encouraged people to form a 501c3. So I don't know if people had comments about that part of the process. I'm not sure what we're thinking about that. So that was one of the things I had a question about. And then, it is interesting discussion about the best next steps. The other thing that right now we don't have any kind of formal committee taking this on. Of course, we ended the last one and the subcommittee as well. So if people have thoughts about how we continue this process and the best method for doing that, I would encourage them to speak about that. So thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Cindy's coming to the mic.
Hi, Cynthia Einen Hicks, 11 Franklin Road. I grew up in the Crow's Nest, which was part of the Valentine estate behind the Valentine estate until my father had bought the house. It has been along 4 years. I do think that we really need to do something with respect to the roof and the foundation. I appreciate the committee. I appreciate the presentation tonight. I appreciate the forum. I appreciate really the information that was given tonight about the restrictions. And I want to point out, my thought from more of a legal standpoint is that we can have a feasibility study, we can do all of that, but we really need to get to either hire someone or have someone volunteer to get these restrictions in place. They need to be in place. It's been 4 years. As Brandy pointed out, we put restrictions on our property. I mean, we were very happy to do so as part of the whole process. But if the town loses enforceability of those restrictions, ours are null and void. I mean, that's just basically, we don't want that to happen. We truly still believe that this is a gem. This property is really a gem to the town of Ashland. Is it going to take money and a lot of effort and community spirit and whatever else it takes to get this done? Yes, it will. We've had a lot of obstacles with COVID, with costs, with our, getting people to come in and make bids for money that we can even recognize the value for. But it's doable, but we need to get these restrictions in place. I don't know if the cart goes before the horse or the horse goes before the cart. Mine never could decide which way it went, but I think they go hand in hand. But again, I really think that these restrictions, and again, I think it takes someone with the knowledge to be able to go out there and work with people that are willing to be holders to do that. And I really think that that's a priority at this point in time, as well as the roof and the foundation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Diane Mortensen from Prospect Street, and I actually drove down here because I think this is a very important subject. I think the cart before the horse is exactly, what we're talking about here, because we're talking about doing a roof when a foundation is almost ready to fall down. I think we need to prioritize what we do with the barn. I did like the idea of taking the barn down, numbering it, storing the pieces, and maybe rebuilding it. I think it would be a good asset to have the barn on the property, but not in the condition it's in. So I think we do need to put the cart before the horse and figure out what's the priority. Because if we're going to own this property, spending $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 on a roof is, I think, a waste of money. But I just wanted to say my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
Can I do something if you don't mind? People on Zoom?
I don't mind. Depends
Okay.
on what you ask them to do.
Yolanda Greaves, also Prospect Street. First of all, thank you all for being here. Thank you to everyone who's on Zoom. We now have a hand raised. Before I make my comments, I'm going to say this. I think people here in the room have wanted to speak. Most of you have spoken. There's a lot of people on Zoom that I know many of you have opinions. Part of what this forum is to get input and to get a real discussion about how we want to move forward. We got a lot of good information about the process so far, and for anything to move forward, we need input from the community, right? That's what we keep hearing. People want to have input, people want to have input. If you're here on Zoom, I'm going to step back from the microphone, put your hand up, and please give us your thoughts based on what you just heard from Michael. The conservation restrictions, do we spend money on a feasibility study? Do we, do the barn, whatever? Please give us your feedback. That's what we're here looking for. So I'm going to let you.
Great cue in for Helen to to offer her opinions. Helen.
Yes, hi, Helen Nicole for Elliott Circle. I just wanted to make a couple of points, and the first one really is the community engagement, and I totally agreed with Robert. There really needs to be a way to really engage the community, but also to let them know to be engaged. Things don't ever seem to come up about meetings like this in time for people to know about them. I found out about this last minute. And I know a lot of people probably don't even know that it's going on. And I think that there should be a lot more prior notice, also multi ways of the advertising so that people that are not online would also be able to know that, you know, things are going on. That was one point. And then the other point I wanted to make, I really do agree that they need to fix the roof, because as was stated earlier, if you know, once the roof goes, everything goes. And I really would personally, as someone who, you know, does like support historic preservation, this is a historically significant property. I would prefer to see the barn restored than taken apart. I strongly object to that. And also, I really think that getting the community engaged and getting the community behind something like this would give you a lot more support for the historic preservation. And I think a lot of people would really be interested. I know people I've talked with about it who didn't even know anything about it, became interested as soon as you start talking about it. So I think that really there'd be a lot of interest, and that community engagement is extremely important. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. You know, I do want to offer the fact of where this was advertised, and I'm not saying that we can't do a better job, because I think we can always do better in terms of getting the word out. But I believe this was advertised in print media with the local town pages last month. It's been on Facebook for, I think, over a month for those of you that use social media. And it's also been a part of my email newsletter, which has like 4,000 subscribers, I believe. Again, I'm not saying that we can't do better, because I think we always can improve, especially in this area. But we have made a concerted effort to make sure people know about this. Yolanda, if you don't mind, just wait. Miles just raised his hand.
Nope, I'm good.
Miles, if you would please unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks. Miles McConnell, and I live in the estates across, kind of across the street from the facility. My background in this, I lived here about 3.5 years, and probably about 2.5 years ago got involved with the Valentine Committee. As most people who know me and have engaged with me know, that I'm primarily interested in the barn. That is the focus that I come to this with. I like the whole thing and a lot of good ideas, but in the discussion about the condition of the barn and what needs to be done with it, looking at it, I'm very strongly in favor of preserving what I believe to be an 18th century asset, which is very rare. However, I think I may have been one of the first ones to advocate that we consider taking the pieces apart and kind of rebuilding the structure to showcase the pieces of it that we can salvage as a part of a proper construction. My concern about going with the restoring of the foundation in somewhat of a historic preservational approach will severely limit potential for uses of that, because modern codes don't really pay much attention to historic precedents. So looking at it, I think moving forward with something that salvages the structure, I think is paramount. But unless we are going to settle on a somewhat limited use of the barn structure, I think we're going to run into heavy headwinds in trying to use old construction methods and materials for the structure itself. So I just want to put out there from my point of view, I think it would be really good idea to work swiftly to get the barn taken apart and work on getting a way to rebuild it with proper construction methods that we could showcase, as I said, the elements of historical value. That happens a lot with preservation of antiquities, structures all over the place. I don't think it eliminates its value. I think it just salvages a lot of its value. Thank you.
Thanks, Miles. And just to address a couple of comments that you made, I think one of the things that we have a concern with in terms of taking the proper, dismantling and reassembling the barn at this current point in time is the funding associated with doing that. And I'm not necessarily sure, even with the $750,000 that we have, that it would be enough. If you looked at Colonial Barn Restoration's estimate, even just redoing the substructure, the full substructure was, I think, $400,000. And that was without even utilizing prevailing wages, which is a nice bureaucratic hurdle that municipalities have to face and which makes projects more expensive. So I know we were heading down that road, but that was one of the main concerns that we had. I guess it's something that we could look at disassembling and keeping it disassembled until we had the money to reassemble it. But I just wanted to point out that's one of the challenges that we had.
Understood. Thank you.
Thanks, Miles. Roberta.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having the forum and for inviting us to participate. I have some thoughts and I have some things that I want to say in support of ideas and thoughts that other people have put forward. I think that the overwhelming support of the town for the 4 town warrants that got us this property in 2018 conveys with that a high level of responsibility for the town to preserve, protect, keep, and guard the property. And for those reasons, I think it's imperative that we do a CR as soon as possible. We have a repeated pattern in town of buying property, not really knowing exactly what we're going to do with it, and letting it languish either into disrepair or just languish without the legally required CRs that should be put in place as soon as possible after the land is purchased. So I really think that needs to happen quickly as possible. And it also needs to happen as quickly as possible so that the town is respectful of what Cindy and Robin have given up with the covenant on their property and what they've been willing to do for the town. We need to keep up our end of that bargain and do it as soon as we can. I think we need to fix the roof and the foundation before we lose it all. It would be irresponsible to buy something and take such poor care of it that it falls down in front of your face when you've had it for a number of years. I love the idea of doing a farm. I think if nothing else, COVID has taught us that the supply chain could be massively interrupted at any time, and that includes the food supply chain. I think it's a great educational tool, as we saw with the Natick Community Organic Farm, but it's also a great contributor to sustainability for the community in so many ways that I think it would be wonderful to do that, in addition to it also tying back to the historic use of the land. And finally, I just think that we have such a great resource here in terms of Kate Valentine and her family, that we need to encourage their involvement to the maximum extent possible and find any way that we can for Kate to be an active participant in whatever happens here, so that we can, I just think it's such a great thing to have people who are connected to the family that originally owned this property and they have a historic connection to it. I think that will go a long way towards getting a holder. I think it may go a long way towards fundraising money to do whatever we decide that we want to do. And I think that, she's had some wonderful ideas to present to us. And I think it would be a real awful shame not to involve her and the family as much as possible.
Thanks, Roberta.
Oh, one more thing. I'm sorry.
Oh, sure.
I agree with Kate Jurzik that I think if we're going to have someone work on the property to do the roof of the foundation, to take Miles's concern into account and also Kate's into account, I think we should have someone as a requirement that they have historic restoration expertise.
Thank you.
Because I know a lot of crummy contractors who could slap it together so it stands up and it just won't be viable moving forward.
Understood. Thanks, Roberta.
Thank you, Michael.
Margie? I haven't forgotten
Hi,
you either,
Margie.
Yolanda, I know.
No, that's, I
So,
actually want, this
okay.
is what I want. This is Margie Gassell, 8 Adams Road. Luckily for me, Roberta is such an eloquent speaker, and I agree with every single thing that she said, so I'm not going to repeat it. But I do want to add that the idea of going back to the historic use of the property as a farm, repeating that in the future, is also an excellent idea in terms of being part of our net zero action plan. Because, you know, it would reduce emissions in a number of ways. It would involve storage of carbon and replenishment of the soil and so forth. That's it.
Thanks, Margie. I do just want to remind everybody that Kate Valentine's concept also included a farm as part of it. Judith?
Hi, my name is Judy Javapur. I live on Rome Way. I know there's a lot of talk about conservation and a historic perspective. I'm not really, those interest me, but my real interest is that I drive by the building every day and it's really become an eyesore. So that's really my biggest concern. I was involved, or I attended a lot of the forums back in 2018 because I just didn't want that big apartment complex to come in. I'm being honest. That's my sentiment, and it's just the roof and the condition of that barn. Again, I know this is a statement that's a lot of people are gonna not like, but either repair it or tear it down. That's my sentiment. Just because, what are we gonna do? It's been sitting there for 4 years. What is our goal? And to be honest, I thought I was coming here tonight, and you were gonna be telling me that everything was in place and it was gonna be a farm, and all the permits were all done. And I'm just kind of shocked that, I thought I was kind of informed, and I guess I'm really behind the times, I guess. So that's it.
It's a long ways from there to there. Thank you. Yolanda, you want to jump up now?
Before I talk, again, there's still a couple people sitting there. Maybe you have thoughts, maybe not. What I would say is if you're not comfortable doing it now, make sure you reach out to the town manager, the select board. It's funny, I think about this property, and I think about when it was first proposed to us to buy it. And I didn't oppose it, but I certainly didn't want to pay a lot of money for it. And I am thankful for what Robin and Cynthia did in regards to their restrictions, because that made this purchase worth it to me. I also remember the conversations that were had about what we could do with this property. Could we do something like Hopkinton Center for the Arts? Could we do something like the Holliston Historical Society? And has already been mentioned a number of times here in Ashland, unfortunately, historically, we go gung-ho, we purchase a piece of property, and then we try to figure out what we're going to do with this. And when we were talking about this property and purchasing this property and the idea of doing something like the Tavern, or there was another facility that they had turned a barn into this great music event and all these things, The discussion was always that it would need to be a public-private partnership. And because as a town, we may not have the resources to really make this into what we want it to be. For a lot of great public-private partnerships, there has to be the ability to do a long-term lease. So when we were initially talking about this, and some of the people who, and I know this is going to be disputed and I don't care, who were in the conversations about possible public-private partnerships, and then we found out that the Article 97 was put on it. With the Article 97 land, you cannot do a long-term lease. We could never do something like Hopkinton Center for the Arts. They have a long-term lease where they pay $1 a year and then they fundraise and put a lot into it. Now, I'm hoping that with Kate Valentine, and I would say, Kate, this is my personal opinion, this is not me as a select board person saying this, now would be the time to send us your proposal. Let's make it public. Let's get people to give feedback. Again, my personal opinion, and Rob said this as well, Cynthia and Kate and Robin, you've asked about doing a 501(c)(3), go for it. It's not that difficult to set one up. Cynthia, you're a lawyer. I'm sure you have other people who do. I mean, our historical society is a nonprofit. There's a lot of people who do them. Go for it. Get that set up. People, as I've said from the beginning, for this property, people want it to be successful. Members in our community want something to happen with this property. We had a setback. We had our our Valentine property, you know, our group. They had a lot of good discussions. Did they maybe get a wrong direction? I don't know. But we now need to move forward. So I would recommend you can be working on the restrictions at the same time. Do we need to do a feasibility study? I don't know. I'd say let's look at Kate Valentine's plan. Is that something we can get behind? You can do both at the same time. They don't have to be done separately. During the presentation, Michael, it was mentioned that the Society for Northeast Antiquities was the restriction holder for one of the properties you talked about.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that's an organization specifically for the property that they're the holder for, or is that an organization that we could look at and say, we have this antique property, we want to restore it, we do want to do something with it. Would you be willing to work with us to do something? This is the first that, again, I was not paying attention at all the Valentine meetings, but let's look at that, right? We now have someone who has held a restriction. Can we look into that? There's been so many, I ran into actually Dave Foster today. I was in Marathon getting lunch. And I said, yeah, we're having a meeting tonight. And he goes, oh yeah? Do you have a plan? So, you know, there's so much frustration about this property. There's so much discussion about this property. Are our town staff doing a lot? Yes. Are there volunteers? Are there people in this community who are passionate about this? Yes. Let's call a meeting. And if you are interested in any way in helping out, in fundraising, in doing anything, let's get us all together, right? COVID is pretty much over, and I know that was an issue for a lot of people, getting together. We have a lot of smart people in this community. We have a lot of things, and we have, you know, this shouldn't be this hard. And I know we have to deal with RFPs, you know, or because it's town-owned property, we have to be concerned about that. But the other people have done it, right? I look at Medway's project, right? Again, when we were looking at buying this property, that to me made so much sense. You have someone living upstairs, the downstairs is usable for stuff that, you know. So all I would say is, please keep giving your feedback. Do it via email. Pick up the phone. Call us. We want to hear from people, okay? So, you know, just let's, and in regards to It was mentioned that we have a bunch of properties that need CRs. Let's put our CR restriction working group back together. We've been talking about that. Let's do that. We have people who have volunteered. It's got to be easier to do multiple ones at the same time if you're doing similar properties to get that done. So all I can say is I love the passion behind this project. Kate, thank you for being here. Thank you for being willing to participate. Let's use the resources that we have and let's get something done. Thank you.
Thank you. Robin?
Robin Hicks, 11 Franklin Road. The passion, I agree. The house is there. We can do something with the house while we're working on the bond. We've focused all our thoughts on the bond, but the house is in perfectly good condition. So we should take a look at what we can do with the house. Can we have an art center? Can we have a poetry, which Kate Valentine's very involved in? Can we have a theater? Could we have, so we shouldn't just be focusing on the bond, we should be focusing on the whole property.
I mean, let's put it, the house is not in the same condition as the barn in, but the house is not in great condition.
I disagree. I mean, we walked through that house. It's dirty. There's no doubt in my mind. It has to be clean. But the greenhouse where Cindy used to sleep, I mean, it's in nice condition. I mean, there's a working. We don't have any electricity. There's no water running. We should get that hooked up. We should get hooked up to the town sewage, which we haven't. And there's a actual stub going off that I think the Petrie paid for. So there's stuff that can be done while we're still fighting over what to do with the bond, and we should be doing it. We had a cleanup committee that there were 7 of us, and we did a fantastic job in the back, and we could move ourselves around. But there's stuff that can be done instead of just us sitting here with our hands on our, sitting on our hands. I mean, we should, and 774-418-3621 is my phone number. Call me if you want to come and help clean up, if we want to keep this thing moving forward, and we have to. Thank you.
Can I just say, we're not sitting on our hands on this.
Sorry, Mike, I didn't mean that. I meant there's a lot of people out here that haven't volunteered to let's get this thing moving. If you can mow the lawn, mow the lawn. If you can pick up trash, spray the poison ivy on that beautiful wall. Whatever,
I appreciate that.
Whatever we can do, pick up the mattresses, 4 mattresses. Anyone need a mattress? There's 4 of them.
Yeah.
Take them, they're free. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin.
Kate Jerzik, 11 Rodman Road. I'm out of practice of saying that at meetings. So I think I would love, there's quite a few people here. I know it's not, it's not a town meeting, and I think, but can we put a stake in the ground about like cleanup and moving forward, like literally like tonight, like by this date? Because I mean, that's what I'm hearing from a lot of people, and it is a treasure for our town, and right now it does not look like the treasure. And I think that I think most people, can see some version of the Kate Valentine, and right now we'd almost be embarrassed to like say we want to do that. This is a town property, and we do have pride of stuff in town. So I in addition to what you guys are doing with the roof and foundation, there's things that Robin are talking about, and I think it just like we forget about it and we drive by and it looks crappy, right? We're better than that in Ashland, and I just think we have to say we want to by X date do this and move it forward, and people will see that and they will react positively to that. But I think that's what Robin's talking about. It feels like we're not going forward, even if there are smaller things. It has to be more public. It has to be celebrated. I think we can have a way, maybe opening the house, right? Like maybe you say once a month the house is and people come see it because they get more excited. There's just lots we can do, and I think we have to.
I would agree with that.
Hi, Carl Hackinson, 346 Chestnut Street. And I was one of the people in the room in the early discussions for this property. As a matter of fact, I was the chair of the select board at the time. But I think that we should talk about why this property is Article 97 land, because it wasn't Article 97 land at the time of those discussions. It became Article 97 land when the term for conservation and parkland purposes, those exact words, were put in the warrant article at town meeting. I didn't write the warrant article. Town council wrote the warrant article. So when we reviewed those warrant articles, it was incumbent on town council to explain to the board the repercussions of putting those words in the warrant article. And when it was brought to your attention that those words were in the warrant article and that it attached Article 97, you all fought it. I'll take credit for being part of this negotiation, but I'm not going to take the blame for leading you down the wrong road, Yolanda. We had these discussions. We had plenty of discussions about what the property should be used for, what the property could be used for. And the property still can be used for those things. So to say that you can't enter into a lease or you can't enter into an agreement with a public-private is just disingenuous. There are certain ways that you can do that. I offered to explain that to the select board many times and have been ignored. So, you know, I didn't want to speak tonight, and I was kind of hoping we could get through one of these meetings without this stuff landing back in my lap, because I'm uncomfortable with that. But I didn't write the warrant article, and I did explain the repercussions of that language to the board. And it should have been explained to you by town council, and for some reason it wasn't. Michael and I have talked a lot about this. I didn't want that to be part of the public discussion, but you invited that as part of the public discussion. If you want to talk about Article 97, then let's talk about why this property is Article 97 and how we can work around that. Because it's really not an impediment to what 99% of the things that all of you had talked about this evening going forward. It's really not. It was an impediment to that proposal that Scott referred to earlier. I think it was Scott referred to earlier. That couldn't happen under Article 97. But many things can. And 99% of the ideas that the committee has come up with can, if it's phrased correctly and if it's consistent with the restrictions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Rob, you have your hand raised?
Sorry, it took me a while. Yeah, I just want to say, well, Carl knows a lot about this kind of stuff, and I would encourage that, Carl, that you stay involved and that we keep you involved, especially as we approach this issue about the holder versus the proposal, Mike's proposal for an assessment, which I think is a legitimate discussion to have, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. But I do also want to say that I don't think people were blaming anyone, especially you, Carl, for this. I didn't get that sense. So, you know, I don't think that's what's going on. I think people pretty much understand the situation about Article 97, and I think we're moving on. You know, my feeling is that people understand that Article 97 is going to stay in place, and you know, actually, I think we could use some sound advice about how to structure what we want to do with the Article 97 in place. So I think that's where we're at with that. So I would encourage that kind of participation and advice about that. So, and you know, actually, I'm actually interested in hearing ideas about how to move forward organizationally. I know the town manager is spending a lot of time on this, and town staff, and maybe there's some ways we can explore about how to have a citizens group take on that, like we do many times. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think we're going in a good direction, but I think we need to figure out how to move forward, and you know, and organizationally, and whether we're going to do this assessment, which I think is an interesting idea and one way that could give us some important information. So But I look forward to hearing people's thoughts on that and having that discussion. So thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
I just had a question. Do we have limitations on what we can do with the house if we wanted to open up the house for use for whether it was for meeting space or for people to run an art class or something? And also with that is can we get an occupancy permit to occupy that home? And again, just questions after questions, but is there a cost involved with getting the home where we can utilize it? Because I think we all can agree that the property is an eyesore. But if maybe utilizing the property might take care of going there and somebody weed whacking or mowing it or even noticing that there's a mattress there within a day and getting rid of it. Just curious what the restrictions on the property are now and if we can actually use them, and then maybe that would help us to get a little bit more interest in the property in the meantime.
Well, I think the first part of that question, it would have to be in good enough condition that it could succeed in getting an occupancy permit or whatever permits are necessary for you to actually use it. But I think as long as it's not used for like a for-profit entity, I don't see why we couldn't do some of those things. I don't want to say for sure because I don't know for sure.
We might have to put some money into it, but not maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then if we were to get a group or an organization to help us either run it, manage it, or develop it to whatever extent, would we have to do anything to either one of those pieces of property before we got them involved?
That's a good question. That would depend on the conversations between the organization and the town, really. Cool. Oh. No, she's still. Carl, did you want to say? Sure.
With regard to both Article 97 and the restrictions, the uses have to be consistent with the purposes of those things. So I hate to sound like a lawyer, but it really depends. It depends for something similar to what they were describing at is it the Thayer House in Medway? That probably would be allowed because it's, but that's a bad example because that's probably not Article 97 land. But let's say that we had a farm there. And to your point, could we have a farmer living at that house that was running the farm? Most likely, yes, because it's consistent with consistent with open space and parkland. Now, keep in mind that parkland has a very broader definition than open space, and it's open space and parkland. So if we create a park there that serves several purposes, one being agricultural, one being arts, maybe another being open space, whatever is consistent with supporting those uses would be allowed in the buildings, providing that the holders agreed to that. Does that make sense?
So the question that was asked is from the audience is if I'm planning another meeting or another forum like this. Prior to this meeting, I wasn't. I was hoping I could get a little more clarity in terms of what direction that we could go in, and I feel like in some ways I've received a little bit more clarity. I think that stake in the ground that you're talking about, Kate, I think we definitely have to fix the roof and the foundation. I think to preserve our ability to do anything with that barn, that's priority number one. So, if bids come in higher than what's expected, then and we have those resources, then I would propose that we go ahead and use those funds to fix the roof and fix the foundation. I think from that standpoint, I think Yolanda made the point of could we take Kate's proposal, Kate's conceptual design, and make that public and start getting some feedback on that? I think that would be a good next step as well. I think because I think if we could center in on a use and at least just a concept, then everything else will start gelling around that. Then we can start talking a little bit more about conservation and preservation restrictions, and we kind of know what kind of uses that we're talking about when we're having and engaging in those discussions. Similarly, I do think we should move forward with a master plan or a feasibility study based on those uses, if that is what is ultimately agreed upon as the next, this is the vision that we want to and capture for this property. Because I do think we'll need at least a high-level estimate to understand what it's going to cost the community. And just then, at that point in time, you can make a decision about how you want to approach it. We have different resources available. We could always talk about a debt exclusion, but we also have CPA funds available, and we also have general fund capital available. I can tell you personally, I would much rather see any future capital monies that aren't necessarily dedicated to equipment or repairs of our current facilities dedicated to some of these existing projects that we have left unfinished. I think that's important before we start anything else. So that's kind of my takeaway from this. And so Robin, to your question, I think after we get that proposal or that concept out there, I think we should have a meeting after that and see, after people have had a chance to review it, is this something that we want to move forward with? I'm sorry? I'm not necessarily sure if we can, Kate, but we could potentially do outside, yes. Yes, Kate. I'm just looking at what's on my screen first here. Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thanks. This is Kate Valentine again. I had a thought, and I don't know how feasible it is from multiple standpoints, but I'm wondering if it would be possible before we get too deep into the colder season to have an event happen on the property, not in the barn, not in the main house, but in the outdoor space as a fundraiser for whatever happens next. If within, say, the next 3 months, we were able to galvanize a little bit and 501c3 was formed and a certain amount of money was allocated, however much needs, just to mow the lawn and have the property, just the land space, be in good enough shape for people to gather there, if that would be something that would make sense and of interest.
Okay. I think that's certainly something that we could look into.
If that is something that makes sense, I mean, I know it's a short timeline, but I think it might be a meetable deadline. I would be more than happy to participate in creating something that could bring people together to try to, have a real physical forum of people enjoying the space and thinking about what could happen next.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Kate. Cedric.
Hi, Cedric Bacon. I live at 128 Olive Street. I've been involved on the Valentine property one way or another for the last 3 years. And I'd like to kind of put a quote from, I think it's Eisenhower, saying that plans are useless, but planning is everything. And I think that's where, in my last 3 years on the Valentine property, where that was difficult, is there was not a master plan or not a way of planning step by step to get there. It's even the conversation tonight, like some people care about like mowing the lawn, other people talk about the barn, and then we switch to what will be the master plan, and then go back to mowing the lawn, right? That's not a very constructive conversation. We need a framework to really organize what would be the way to move forward. We have to see that as a $10 million project one way or another, right? It costs $4 million to the town up to now. It's going to cost a few other million to get somewhere, and then there will be sustaining costs in the future. We need to plan for that to happen, and any use or reuse that will come from that will come with a cost, and we don't want that to become a money pit for the town either. I think Michael and I already emailed you about that. I think we really need to have like a structure to talk about all those different things: funding, restriction, the building itself, and everything else. And we cannot just like have town hall or meeting like that where we don't have a direction. We need to be more organized in the way we talk about it to get somewhere. And I agree with the investing to do some planning and know what we're getting into exactly instead of just guessing.
Thank you. Thank you, Cedric. Okay, not seeing any other comments. Yep. Not related, but related?
So early on, the conversation was people didn't know about this. And to Michael's point, we talked about it at different select board meetings. It was in the paper, Facebook, but if you're not on social media, would a reverse 911, would that have been something people would want to hear? We don't use it in town unless for trash or something like that. And we have a lot going on, so I don't know that I'd want to do this a lot. But, and again, if you don't know how you want to respond back. You know, should there have been a reverse 911 that said, we're having this meeting about an important piece of property? So that's a question, and again, you can let us know, but just a question.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm not seeing any more questions or comments. I'll give everybody one last chance if they want to say something. Scott?
Yeah, Scott Lubell, 10 Haven Way. So my question to Michael is, for those of us who really don't understand the purpose of a feasibility study and how that would help move the process forward, could you please explain that? Thank you.
So and again, let's just take Kate Valentine's conceptual plan as an example. And let's just say that everybody, or the majority of people, where we reach consensus is this is a vision that we want to adopt and move forward with. What a feasibility or a master plan would allow us to do is, okay, what do you need in place to make that happen in terms of the structures? You know, what do you need to have, a floor that's rated for X amount of people? Do you need to have a sprinkler system? Do you need to have things like that? What would that actually look like? And you don't want to spend money to get into too much detailed engineering, but it's basically getting the program together, which is what you would like to use the property for, and seeing how it fits in different spaces within the property and how that would work. A good example or a corollary, I think, would be the public safety building. So when we had two different parcels that we were looking at in terms of where to put a public safety building, we did a feasibility study that looked at those two parcels. But it also looked at the programming. So what was going to be necessary in that building? What were we going to need in terms of dorms for the firefighters? What type of offices would we need? What type of apparatus would we house? And then from that point, you build that program and you say, okay, knowing this is what we need, this is what a high-level estimate is going to be of what it would cost to do that. And so that's what I'm proposing for the Valentine property. Again, we would need to get that programming element down and understand exactly what we would want to do with that property. And then we would have an expert come in who could come in and say, okay, if you want to do this, you're going to need to do that. And this is what it would cost. In the mean debts.
I guess my follow-up question is to the people who didn't understand the need for a feasibility study, did that help?
Yeah, does anybody who didn't necessarily think that was a good expense, meaning a feasibility study, does my explanation change your mind? No. No. Okay. It would take 3 or 4 months, I would say. Okay, the question is, well, let me answer Judith's question, because I think it's a good one. And if you don't have the benefit of seeing Kate Valentine's conceptual design, it's really hard to kind of envision what I'm talking about. Kate's design, and I will go back to sharing the screen if you don't mind. Please let this work. So if you see here, if you look at the lower left quadrant, that's the barn and the house. So the barn would be theater and function space, and the house would be a multifunctional space for rooms and meetings, etc. And so if you look at the back, that would be an outdoor amphitheater type of space. So that would need to be cleared. And it's got a natural hill there, so it lends itself to that. And then if you see over on the right, that was proposed to be farmland. So a feasibility study or a master plan would look at all of those ideas, that whole picture, and say, this is the program that we want. And again, look at what's necessary for that. But I think another point, and we talked about this earlier tonight, is that we could also get an estimate that's broken down into different pieces. So like, yeah, if we want to do the farm part, just the farm right now, this is what it would take, and this is what it would cost. If we want to do just the theater and function hall type of space, this is what it would cost. I think, Kate, that was the point that you made. Not going for the whole enchilada at once.
Well, I think I'm with Judith and a lot of people. I don't know that I may or may not have seen the Kate Valentine plan, but most people haven't, and so I don't know what we're sending
Okay.
out to study. I think I totally agree with Cedric when we get there, but I don't think we're there, or what are we studying? I don't think we have really much community agreement
So-
on that, because we haven't even seen it.
Again, I'll go back to the point I made last couple of times I talked. I think we've got a couple of stakes in the ground, a couple processes moving forward. So first element, I think, is to go ahead and move forward with the roof foundation, or the roof repair and the foundation repair. Let's go ahead and get that done. Again, that preserves our ability to do something with the barn in the future. Next, I would look at publicizing Kate's conceptual design. And what we can do is we can put it on the Valentine section of the website, which is under priority projects, and it has a lot of other documents. We can add that to that. And then we could, publicize that, direct people to that, let them look at it, review it, and then we have another forum and we can talk about it if that's the direction we want to go in. And if that's the case, then maybe then we decide to put forward the money for a feasibility or a master plan for that. If Cliff... Sorry, Helen. Go ahead and unmute.
Helen Nicole. I just wanted to make a couple of more points. One, I have seen that Kate Valentine's plan, and it's a very good plan. I really liked it a lot, and I really think that if you could get the community to see it, that would be a really big boost in getting more support. And I think that it has to be multi-pronged. I don't know about a reverse 911, that might help. I don't know what it takes. You don't get a lot of people out to vote, but I think it has to cover a lot more areas than what you're covering now. I think there need to be multiple bulletin boards throughout the town where people see things on a regular basis. Maybe even have flyers put into stores where people can see them. I know in Holliston, I go there and I find flyers all the time at the Superette for things going on there. And I know more about what's going in Holliston sometimes than I do in Ashland. So I think you have to really get an online and offline presence, and it's really, really important. The other point I just wanted to make too is that I think there's a lot of great ideas for the property, but you were talking about funding it and how that would work, and I think that probably one of the things that would really be important is that once it got established as something, especially if you had events going on, it would partially fund itself. And I had ideas. I had talked to some people about doing some fundraisers. The the nonprofit has to be set up first. But you know, there are people out there that really are interested in doing things like that. So I think all of that could be worked out, and I think you'd get a lot more interest, you know, with Kate's plan, because it really is a good plan. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Cliff, did you want to make a comment, or did you? Thanks. Well, this should be a doozy then.
No.
So.
The reason I said that I was opposed to, I think you gave a figure of $74,000 or something, which leads me to believe that you already got somebody in mind to be your expert, who's agreed to work for $74,000. But besides that point, what I was saying was, I want to see the roof and I want to see the foundation fixed now. I wanted to see it fixed 3 or 4 years ago. I want that preserved, because if we let this go any longer, then this whole conversation, this whole meeting is moot. Do I think that some planning in the future might be necessary? Yes, but I'm not sure who your expert might be, and I don't think you know, because I don't think there is an expert on this subject matter that can cover agricultural and cover arts and cover all of these things that we're not sure what they are. Or is the expert supposed to be coming up with them, and we don't even have an expert? So we're going to spend 10 years trying to find somebody who's an expert. So I'm just saying, let's get the doggone barn sound. Let's get a roof on it. Let's get a foundation on it. I have seen Kate's plan, by the way. I think it's a beautiful plan. And I know that there are a lot of people out there, whether they're on the meeting tonight or not, who support a lot of these ideas. But I just hate to see us dragging on and on and on. At some point, should we have perhaps somebody come in to give us estimates on things that we have decided amongst ourselves, amongst the town? We have decided what we want to do, and then have somebody come in and tell us how much it's going to cost to do it? That's fine. That's a different matter. But to go out and say, oh, let's get an expert on this field, there is no expert on this field.
Didn't I just say that we would be the ones that determine the programming?
Yeah, but that's not what we were talking about originally.
No. Isn't that just what I said?
No. There. Always say no first. You're a lot safer.
Okay.
But that was why I was talking about the expert. And to put a figure on a non-existent person.
I would hope 75 would be way more than enough.
No, I'm going to ask for 80.
Okay.
I know you're trying to conclude the meeting, so I'll make it quick, but I was just curious if the conceptual plan would actually give us an idea of whether we're going to do the cart or the horse first with the barn specifically. Like if they say, would it get into specific details that if we repair the roof on the barn, or if we repair the foundation on the barn, like if we do that work, let's just say we spend $500,000 on the property, is it going to be there and not, we won't be able to do anything with it? Like, will that design get into those details? Because what I'm just afraid of is that if we repair the roof, which I know we all agree that we need to do, but we're going to repair the roof, and then we might not be able to do anything with that barn. It might be money that literally we're going to take down to the ground someday. And that's what concerns me, is that, you know, we should literally be starting from the ground up. But if this conceptual plan will give us an idea of which way we could go, that we can actually utilize the building after we spend that kind of money on a roof.
Well, Diane, I think if we don't do something with the roof and foundation soon, the choice is going to be made for us, and it's going to fall down.
Well,
So
we might be having this conversation a couple of years from now, talking about the same thing.
Yeah. So.
I just want to say, from my perspective, I hope that if we spend this money on the roof, that we can actually use the barn and not end up taking it down and wasted the money. That's what I'm concerned about. I agree that the barn needs to be replaced. I agree that it's an eyesore, but I'm just worried, me personally, that we're spending money on a roof and the foundation is not going to be able to support a dance, whatever, an art studio, whatever the case may be that we want to have there. So I just know that I don't know which way, and I didn't know if the conceptual plan would actually be able to help us, give us an idea.
That would help us. It
Okay.
would help us. Okay. All right. Well, it is 9 p.m. Not that we had a strict deadline, but I want to thank all of you for coming here, both virtually and those of you who came here in attendance. We haven't had like a public forum like in real life in a long time, so it's nice to get back to those in a bit. I'm glad we also have this expanded access through Zoom to be able to reach more people as well. Again, I'll reiterate, takeaways coming from this meeting is, I think, we go ahead, we get the bids next Tuesday, or Thursday, excuse me, the 7th for the roof and the foundation. We see what that is. We put the money into those repairs. We go ahead and put Kate Valentine's conceptual plan up on the website, direct people to that, give them a chance to review it, and then we reconvene and we figure out what our next, if people embrace that, what do we do for the next steps moving forward? So again, that concludes our forum for the evening. Thank you again for attending, and good night.